Hello and welcome to a very special oddschecker betting show. We're not previewing any racing this week and I'm only joined by one guest, but I am joined by the man himself, Andy Holding. And rather than trying to find us a couple of winners this week, he's going to be putting up his 12 horses to follow over the course of the flat season. Andy, this is always one of my favourite podcasts, always one of my favourite shows I do with you, where my notebook becomes absolutely bulging and it makes the next few weeks particularly exciting. Beginning of May, we've seen most horses have at least one run over the course of the flat season so far, and you've gone for a mixture here, I guess, of some exciting young 2-year-olds, a couple of sprinters, a couple of kind of middle distance horses as well.
Yeah, a bit of a mixed bag, to be honest, George, but I think it's quite nice when we have a variety of horses to look at. More importantly for the listeners as well, I think some very good 2-year-olds that I just want to make everyone aware of have run some really exciting time figures already. And they're likely to be Royal Ascot bound. And talking to Royal Ascot, majority of the others who've had a run and caught my eye in good races also should be heading towards the Royal meeting as well. So with a few of these, you can probably fiddle around and get a few anti-post prices about respective races we're going to talk about. A few of them, the handicaps, probably not so much. But yeah, generally a good spread. Nice 12 from 5 furlongs up to 2 miles. So let's begin.
Let's get into it. I mean, naturally with this, plenty of these horses have entry to Royal Ascot and other races around the UK and Ireland. I'm not going to be able to stay on top and give you prices for all of them, but do download the oddschecker app now and you'll find all those Royal Ascot prices up there as well. And I'll do my best to kind of keep my finger on the pulse and get prices wherever we can as well. So do download the app now, as is always the case. For the best prices, bookie offers free bets, place terms, and Andy's tips straight to the app every morning of racing. But if you want his 12 to follow, this is the only place to find it on the oddschecker betting show. And let's get into it now. And we're starting with a couple of sprinters over the Irish Sea for the first one here. Power Under Me is your first pick.
Yeah, decent horse last season to the 3-year-old. Ended up winning at Curragh at listed level. It was quite impressive that day on the clock and visually. Then he came back the other day at Cork and he was really, really good all the way through, again at listed level, but it was a much better race than that. There was lots of horses that were basically group 1, group 2 horses dropping back down to listed level, just basically to dip their toe in the water for the first time to get them a run under their belt. And I love the way that Gio Lyons' horse hit the line. He was very strong at the finish. He beat Moonista, a horse that got beat next time out by Romantic Proposal over at Naas, but I don't think there was any disgrace in that. I think Romantic Proposal could easily have been added to this list, George, to be fair. She's a sprinter going places from the Eddie Lynham stable. But Moonista was rather caught out of her ground, not tracking the pace over on the far side, which was favoured that day. So I do think that form of that Cork race is pretty good. We've had plenty of horses out of that already that have come out and run well subsequently, including Moonista and Elliptic the other day. Red Lacewing, etc., etc. So I think this horse is certainly ready for Group 2 standard. I think he goes to the Greenlands now, which is on the 21st of May, 10 days away from when we've done this podcast. That's at the Curragh track. Obviously, he's got a really good record over. And then hopefully, and it's not always necessarily the case with Gio Lyons because he very, very rarely runs his horses over the Irish Sea. But if he comes to Ascot, it'll be all roads leading to the Diamond Jubilee, which is the real test of who's the best at 6 furlongs. But I think he's going to be one of the better horses over the sprinting trips, i.e. 5/6 furlongs in Ireland throughout this season.
Yeah, Power Under Me for the Diamond Jubilee is 25 to 1. Presuming you wouldn't be in a rush to bet that until kind of some confirmation that that's where he'll go.
Yeah, he's got to go to the Greenlands, win that first before I start thinking about Royal Ascot. Because, like I say, Gio Lyons is renowned for not wasting bullets. He's a bit like Dermot Weldon in many respects. He likes to keep them on home soil. He doesn't feel the necessity to bring them over unless it's absolutely crucial. He did it with that nice 2-year-old of his last season, which I think bombed out in the Dewhurst. But it's a very, very rare bird if Gio Lyons has a run at the Royal meeting, for instance. He might have one in one of the 2-year-old races, but it's a tip in itself, put it that way, if he does bring one over.
Second horse in your 12 to follow for Ed Walker is Great Ambassador, a horse that over 4 starts last year improved from a 96 rated horse to 108 rated horse with form figures of 3, 1, 1 and 2. So progressive sprinter here, Andy.
Yeah, progressive sprinter and a real special talent. I think Ed Walker's had an embarrassment of riches, hasn't he, in this department for the last season and a half, let's say. He's really done well with his sprinters. Of course, won the July Cup last season with a progressive type. Was it Starman? I think it was. And Great Ambassador, I think, is going to be the next cab off the rank. I don't think there's that much between them. Even now, those two aforementioned horses, even though Starman's proven at Group 1 and Great Ambassador's probably only listed horse theoretically, but he's certainly going into the realms of being a top class sprinter. He was just unlucky in the Air Gold Cup, wasn't his final race of the season. The rain came, he got drawn on the far side. He won his race on the far side, but that pesky Bielsa, who raced alone virtually up the standside rails, went and picked his pocket. Otherwise, he would have ended his season on a high. Prior to, like I say, he was really good at Newmarket. And don't forget, he's got good Ascot form as well. It's the kind of horse that I like backing at Ascot. The horse that's proven at, a stiff track like it is at the Berkshire track. He's certainly worth bearing in mind when it comes to all those big sprint races, such as the King's Stand, or probably more predominantly the Golden Jubilee. I'm not sure where he's going to start his season off. Starman started his off in the Duke of York, and then obviously worked his way through the season. That hasn't been the case with Great Ambassador. Perhaps he's got something else in mind for him, Ed. But he's definitely one when he finally comes out this season to keep on the right side of.
Yeah, Great Ambassador, best price 25-1 for the same race as one we mentioned a second ago. The Platinum Jubilee Stakes, 25-1 with Bet365. The second sprinter there for Andy. We're going to move on now to, we spoke on this podcast a couple of weeks ago about how Godolphin had never won a Derby or an Oaks trial. There won't be many people that put a beaten 11 and 10 favourite in their horses to follow off the back of a run at Lingfield the other week, but you saw enough in Walk of Stars' performance to suggest there's more to come.
Yeah, I think of all the horses that ran in Derby trials, this was the most eye-catching for me personally anyway. Obviously, he had a tour reputation going into that Lingfield race, courtesy of his workman-like victory, let's say, at Newbury, rather than spectacularly when he beat his stabber companion. I think his narrow margin of victory at Newbury was down to greenness and just basically a little bit of unprofessionalism more than anything else. And I still think he's a work in progress, George. He got beat the other day on merit by United Nations, who caught the eye at Epsom the time before, so he's not getting beaten by any mug. The time figure was exceptionally good, even though there was only 4 runners. Stabber companion went off in front and made it a good true gallop, and he was just not quite with it in the early part of the race. He was out wide. The other 3 horses raced on the rail. He raced on the outside. I think Willie Buick could get any cover, and he just spent the first half mile really just taking a bit of a grip, an unhealthy grip, and it meant swinging down into the straight. His finishing effort probably wasn't as strong as it might have been if he would have settled a bit better. But ultimately, I thought it was a really good run. He only got beat half a length by a horse who goes straight to Epsom, so I'm led to believe. And if Connections still want to roll the dice with Walker Stars, and I don't see any reason why they wouldn't, because New London blew out. They haven't really got a superstar so far anyway, as far as I could see for the Derby. I mean, we're looking at sort of the 16-21 there, shortest price. Then I do think this lad is definitely not one to totally write off. Don't forget that Ajidar, last year's Derby winner, was second in this very race last year, almost running a carbon copy race behind Third Realms before he went on to win the Derby. So I think that run at Lingfield would have taught this horse more than it would have done at first glance. So even if he doesn't go to the Derby, or even if he gets beat in the Derby, I still think Walker Stars, as the season progresses, he's going to be one of the better middle distance horses, because he's a really nice looking horse.
Walk of Stars 16-1 best price for the Derby. And before we move on, because this is something that I find frustrating myself when I speak to people about racing, and I'm interested to know if you agree with horses like Walk of Stars, where they've been beaten, over at Lingfield in a race that's going to prove to be obviously a lot weaker than the Derby, even if this year's renewal of the Derby doesn't look the strongest. Do you think people get too bogged down in a form figure? People get too bogged down maybe the fact that, well, he's been beaten this time, so why would he go and win a race that's more difficult, when in actuality things can go wrong, especially a track like Lingfield, where if you're caught wide, there's very little you can do to kind of get back on terms.
Well, like adolescent children, they're all developing all at different stages, and they all come along and learn differently, don't they? They're like kids, aren't they? Some learn arithmetic very, very quickly, and others take a whole term to come to terms with addition and multiplication. And I think horses are just the same, learning on the job. You could just see with this horse as well, when he ran at Newbury, he's still a work in progress, and at Lingfield. He just didn't have the experience of United Nations, who races a 2-year-old and then has had a run this season around a track like Epsom the time before, which taught him a bit about coming down the hill and settling and getting into the rhythm of the race. And I think if they met again, I'd expect Walker Stars to turn the form around with him. And it was, like I say, it was a really good trial. The time figure suggested it was bang on par with all those other trials at Chester. Your Star of India's, your Changing of the Guards, and even the good horse of Ballydors that won on Sunday. There was no favourite for the Derby.
Yeah, Stone Age now 5-2 favourite.
Stone Age, yeah. I mean, like I say, numbers wise, they were right up there. So, like I say, just a lovely scopy type of horse as well. That I'd be pretty confident that he would be the one with the most likelihood to improve as the season develops.
Yeah, Walker Stars there for Andy, third on the list. Next up is Maljoom, last seen at Kempton a month or so ago. 2 from 2 so far for Maljoom, running over a mile last time out.
Yeah, really impressed with this fella. On the clock, visually, the way he won, the way he hit the line at Kempton, his back end sectionals, all suggested to me that he's a group horse in waiting. And William Haggis, who doesn't tilt at windmills too early, unless he feels as though he's got a good one. I mean, he did that with Baid. He chucked him in the deep end after about his third run. Has put this horse in the St James's Palace Stakes at the Royal Meeting. So he must think that this horse is certainly justified to make that kind of entry off the back of 2 runs. And I think he's right as well. Whether he's good enough to go and win a race like that is open to question, but he's got a ton of class. And again, another one I see improving as the season goes along. Physically, he's good to look at, so there's definitely development there. But the engine's there. That's the main thing. With the starting point is the times that he's done, the engine that he's got, and just his attitude and the way he goes about his work. So Maljoom was almost one of the first names on the sheet.
Maljoom, one of the first names on the team sheet for these 12 to follow for Andy, is 20-1 best price currently for the St James Palace Stakes at Royal Ascot. Deauville Legend next for James Ferguson. We've had some powerhouse trainers already here. One, maybe a trainer we're not so used to seeing on these lists at the moment, but certainly in Deauville Legend has a very promising young horse who's got ran last time at Windsor over mile 2, shedding that maiden tag as well. What do you see the future holding for Deauville Legend?
Yeah, again, another race that was good on the time figures, which alerted me to him straight away. He also did the fastest back end sectional on that card as well. I think there was 8 races that night, and there was a couple of 5 furlong, 6 furlong sprint races, albeit at a fairly low level. But the fact that a 1.25 mile race was the best 3 furlong split, and also the time of the race was the fastest overall, suggested to me that this could be a very smart horse in the making. He came out of that with a rating of 89, which I think is more than fair. But it was the 2 horses he beat that day, George, which leads me to think that it was half a decent race. The horse that finished second of Godolphin's, Cosmic something, it was Cosmic Dream, Cosmic Style, something like that, had run behind New London at Newmarket the time before, finished third. So obviously that was strong form. And Godolphin also had another horse called Aerospace, who'd caught the eye first time out at Wolverhampton. That was a very strong favourite. So he was up against 2 Godolphin horses who dominated the market. One was 11-10, the other one was 6-4, or 2-1-ish. And he beat them very easily. And straight away, James Ferguson has decided to put him away for Royal Ascot, not wanting to run foul of ruining that handicap mark of 89. I think he feels as though he's got quite a bit to work with there. Which race he'll end up running at the Royal Meeting, I'm not sure. He's got a choice of 2, because now there's a 1.25 mile handicap for the 3-year-olds, as well as the old King George handicap, which has always been the best middle distance handicap sort of midway through the season. But he's definitely a name that when Royal Ascot and the betting comes out for either one of those 2 handicaps, to have a look at his entries and to take advantage, because I think he'll be a big player on the day.
worth keeping in the notebook there, Deauville Legend one, for future endeavours. Given a mark of 89 after that win at Windsor as well. On then to Trawlerman, another Godolphin horse, this time trained by John and Thady Gosden. Last seen having been gelded at Chelmsford back in April, winning there. And this was a horse that, was impressive at Pontefract. I think you may have put him up next time at Sandown then, but you've seen enough in his seasonal reappearance to suggest that to retain the faith.
Twice this horse has knocked out massive figures, George, so he's got to be very good. The only time he blew out was when I put him up at Sandown in the Derby trial. But the fact that John at that stage of the season was prepared to run him in a race of that nature, he must have thought, he was showing the signs that deserved a Group 3 entry to see for whether he was a Derby horse. Obviously, that didn't materialise. He never run again all season. He got gelded in the interim. And then he came back and he was heavily backed at Chelmsford, as you say, in that race in April. But they went a real good gallop. There was a proper pace right from the very start. There was no prisoners taken. And this horse took a keen hold. He raced right the way around the outside, no cover. He should have fallen through the back of the telly. Most horses that do that at Chelmsford or any all-weather track that race on the outside with no cover, who are keen, just plain and simply don't finish off their races. This horse was the absolute opposite. He kept running with his head down all the way to the line. He beat a real nice horse, James Ferguson's called USS Michigan. They were well clear of the third. There were some good types in behind who were all well fancied on the day. So I massively upgraded this horse's win. It might have looked as just a mandatory victory to most. So, he scrambled down by, half a length. But as I said, if he would have finished 5th or 6th, you couldn't have argued. But the fact that he actually went on to win was a real feather in his cap. I think he's a group horse. I've no doubt about that. John thinks that. I think that's the way he'll be thinking for the rest of the season. But he has only got a mark of 98. So if he still wanted to exploit it in handicap company, he could. I saw he had an entry at York this week in a handicap. So he's probably going to give him one more run in that sphere before maybe thinking group races. So he might save him for Royal Ascot. And he does go well fresh. So just bear that in mind if he hangs fire and doesn't run him for a little while. But again, another one that on everything he's done so far, and the sample, we've only had 5 sample sizes. He's a very smart horse on his day.
Trawlerman on his day. You look through the form figures so far: 3-3-1-6-1. Clearly, a horse that doesn't always show up. When he does, Andy convinced he's a group horse. Entered into the Hardwick, a Royal Ascot, but as you say, a mark of 98 means it could well be a handicap is the next engagement for Trawlerman. On from Trawlerman to Enemy, a horse running over 2 miles last time we saw him for Ian Williams. I think the long distance horse in your 12 to follow here, Andy. Where do you see Enemy going? What's impressed you so far? Just 1 win in 4 runs so far for Ian Williams.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, he's trained by one of my favourite handlers in the game, Ian Williams. I think he's right up there with some of the best dual-purpose handlers around. From 5 furlong sprinters, we can have a horse that wins the Epsom Dash up to 2 milers, including this fella, Enemy, and 3 mile chasers as well. So, give him any horse, he can pretty much lend his hand to anything. And I was really impressed with Enemy at Musselburgh when he made his UK debut. Of course, he'd been out in Maidan. Prior to that, he ran behind Manambo of Godolphins in one of their decent races. But since they've stepped him up in trip, don't forget John Gosden campaigned him in and around a mile. He hasn't looked back. He's looked a really good horse over staying trips. Like I said, he was good on the clock at Musselburgh. Then he went to the Sagaro, which might have seen a bit of a fanciful entry, but I think he would have won that easily had he got a clear run. He spent the whole length of the straight at the Berkshire track screaming for room, couldn't get a run, and in the end he had to pay 2nd or even 3rd fiddle in the end to Princess Zoe. But that's the kind of horse he was up against that he might face, let's say, further down the line in an Ascot Gold Cup. Whether that will materialise, I don't know. Whether he stays in around mile 6, 2 miles, is open to question because I don't think the Gold Cup's 2.5. But I think he's a stayer of some promise. I'm not suggesting for a minute he's going to be up there in the true chance at a various category right at this very moment in time, but he's certainly going to be good enough to be competitive. And like I say, I think he's building himself up and working himself into that middle to top echelon quite quickly. So he's one that I suggest we keep on the right side of.
Yeah, Enemy often with these longer distance horses does take time to come into their own. An Enemy, one that's caught Andy's eye. Yeah, as we say, ran over 2 miles last time out. An entry for the Ascot Gold Cup. Price I think is about 20 to 1 as it stands at the moment. I'll just confirm that shortly. Yeah, 20 to 1 best price. The short's got a 14 to 1 elsewhere. So the secret might be a little bit out there. 20 to 1 for the Ascot Gold Cup for Enemy. High Fibre next up for Rafe Beckett. And he's seen back in April, seasonal reappearance at a Newmarket, beating a nose by Educator.
Yeah, I tipped him up that day, and I felt as though he's the best horse in the race, even though he ended up getting beaten by Educator. He swept to the front, 3 out, travelling all over the field, went probably 2 or 3 lengths clear, and he just got tight. You could see him just run out of petrol in the last 100 yards, and he got done by Educator, who was given a real strong ride by Tom Marquand to get up. I think both of them were Royal Ascot bound. Educator, obviously being the Queen's horse, will definitely be in one of those handicaps, and High Fibre might be up against him. I see him as a King George handicap horse. I think that's the race he'll definitely end up in. He hasn't run since, and he hasn't got an entry. He hasn't had a single entry since. So whether he goes straight to the Royal Meeting or they give him one more run, I don't know. But he's definitely going to get a mile and a half sooner rather than later. That was a mile and a quarter the other day. But I think with that run under his belt, you see a totally different horse, a much fitter horse next time out. It was only fitness that caught him out. As I said, he travelled like the best horse in the race. And he's definitely trained on from 2 to 3, which is sometimes not always the case. So, yeah, High Fibre, again, another solid handicap project in the 3-year-old staying category.
Staying handicaps for High Fibre then. And that is, we're through 8 in your 12 to follow. And we're going to package the last 4 up, Andy, because the last 4, those who've spent there, who've listened dutifully, who've stayed the course to this stage are going to get rewarded now, because this is 2-year-old time. And of course, anyone who doesn't know Andy should know that you have your speed figures. This is where, in my opinion, you're the best of the lot with these horses that have 1 or 2 runs, and you can kind of analyze their performances and what is a small sample size better than most. And you picked out 4 2-year-olds who, in your opinion, are the best so far. And also for those who maybe don't know much about your kind of speed figures and the rest of it, maybe just an explanation of what the ratings mean, and then you can analyze the 4 horses.
Yeah, similar to probably juvenile hurdlers in the winter, George. I probably specialise in this category more than most. I spend the most time analysing and watching them. The numbers mean a lot more because they stand out. If you've got a 2-year-old that runs beyond a 90 time figure, which is our sort of line in the sand, then you know that they're very much in sort of Royal Ascot stroke group category straight off the bat. So these 4 that I'm going to mention here are the only 4 that have run a 90 or upwards so far this season. There's been a lot of good horses. There's been a lot of impressive looking horses that, everyone's gone, wow, that must be a good 2-year-old. But they haven't actually confirmed it on the clock, whereas these 4 have all gone beyond our sort of real tick in the box. So therefore, I think we should keep on the right side of until Royal Ascot.
Well, let's have a look at them then. Should we start with the 2 that raced in the same race last week on Saturday? An Ascot maiden that saw Noble Style finish was a length and 3/4 ahead of a Wallbank. Wallbank, you gave a positive mention for ahead of the Ascot weekend. A proper breeze up horse, looked to be hit the front and looked to be impressive before the Godolphin horse really flew around the outside and got past him. And your figures are telling you this is a stronger maiden than usual, even by Ascot standards. Yeah,
as I say, we talked about this race, didn't we, without having the knowledge of how they might go. And now we've seen what they can do. They backed up all our beliefs beforehand. We thought they were nicely bred and they'd been doing some good work in breeze ups, etc., and had tall reputations. Noble Style was very strongly backed on the day, and boy, oh boy, did he justify that opinion with a scintillating performance. A very strong time figure for the grade. Redemption time, the horse with experience took them along at a good pace. And then once Wallbank hit the front over 2 out, or just over a furlong out, Noble Style came and blew by him in really impressive fashion. His back end 3 furlong sectionals are incredibly good. The overall time was one of the best on the card, not the best, but right up there. A 93 time figure, which is only bettered once last season long by Native Trail, who won the National Stakes. He did a 94 when he won the National Stakes. No other 2-year-old last season ran beyond a 94. This fella's done it first time up, first time out. With running through with greenness still in his system. So he's got to be very, very good to be able to do that. The fact that he's done it at Ascot as well bodes well for the Royal meeting. Which race he'll end up running in depends on how he trains between now and then, what race he wins next, whether he runs over 5 again or over 6, or what other horses Godolphin have got better than him, or with a little bit more of a stamina-laden pedigree. I don't know, but either way, if he goes to Royal Ascot, he's got to be a massive player off the back of that run, and so is the second.
You're both Noble Star and Wallbank, big players at Ascot if they get there. Amazing to hear Noble Star putting in such a performance on debut. We'll look then back to Persian Force, ran in the first 2-year-old race of the campaign back on the 26th of March in the Brocklesby, and not much has proven themselves so far in your book to be any better than Persian Force. No,
he's still the top dog. He ran a mighty time figure first time up in the Brocklesby. By and large, the Brocklesby's worked out really well. The second and third have won, and plenty of other horses further down the line have run well since. And I mean, he could not have won any easier as well. I mean, he was so professional, so impressive. His back end work was incredibly good. He could have gone even quicker. This fella did a 94. So Noble Star did a 93. This fella did a 94, which hasn't been surpassed. It won't be surpassed going into the Royal meeting. This will definitely be the quickest horse going into the Royal meeting off that number. He's due to run on Saturday at Newbury in what looks on paper a real mouth-watering affair. This will be the best race going around town on Newbury on Saturday. He's up against Holgan, who was impressive first time out. Clocked an 88. He's up against Kasib, who won at Salisbury the other day, did an 89. And he's up against that Tajala that won very impressively at Newmarket. But his time figure wasn't anywhere near as good as the other three I've mentioned. But I think Persian Force is very much up there with the very best of these. I'd expect him to win. And that race is over 6 furlongs. So if he does win it and win it well, which I expect, then all roads will lead to the Coventry. If, for instance, he gets beaten, he doesn't quite get the trip, and I think they've got the likes of the Norfolk and the Windsor Castle to drop back on. But I don't expect him to get beat. I think he's a very, very smart colt. Probably the best I've seen so far this season. And yeah, I'm expecting big things for him in the early part of the year. I think he's very good.
Given the strength of this Newbury race on Saturday, because I know, as you say, a couple of those horses that currently entered in against Persian Force stack up pretty well in your time figures as well. Would you be looking at that as a positive and that you might get a bit of a price out Persian Force, or is it maybe a no-bet race because you have respect for the other horses in it?
It'll be interesting to see how they price up. I mean, you've only got to look and see what price he is in his respective races at Royal Ascot. I think he's 7-1 for the Coventry, 6-1 for the Norfolk. So he is favoured or very close to favourite in those two aforementioned races at the Royal meeting. So he should be theoretically favourite to win at Newbury. I don't think he'll be odds on. He can't possibly be odds on up against Holgan and Kasib and Tajala. But yeah, he'll take a bit of beating. I think the Hannons have got a very good one with him.
And finally, the final of the 12, another 2-year-olds for connections I normally associate with tough Mark Johnson 2-year-olds, but instead we've got a exciting looking Carl Burke 2-year-old from Dramatized, last seen winning a couple of weeks ago at Newmarket.
Yeah, the best filly so far of 5 furlongs by a mile is Dramatized. She had bright speed all the way through her Newmarket win, quickened on demand. Again, back end sectionals are very good, backing up that fast overall. 91 time figure. Again, not too far off the colts. She skips the Marygate on Friday, which I think is the race of the season so far. Regards to that Marygate on Friday is absolutely a humdinger, by the way. It's going to take some sorting out of that because all the best fillies, apart from Dramatized, are in it. But yeah, she's exceptionally good. She's exceptionally fast. She's proven herself over a stiff 5 furlongs, and I think something like the Queen Mary is tailor-made for Dramatized.
Going to get a Queen Mary price before we leave you for Dramatized. Not quick enough off the mark. 5-1 best price at this moment. 5-1 Dramatized. You've taken all the 6s Andy. So there we go. There we have it. Andy Holdings, 12 to follow for the flat season. We have, just to recap, Power Under Me, Great Ambassador, Walk of Stars, Maljoom, Deauville Legend, Trawlerman, Enemy, High Fiber, Persian Force, Noble Style, Wallbank, and Dramatize, the final one. 4 2-year-olds at the end there. I would definitely stick those in your tracker. Thank you very much to Andy for sharing his thoughts with us on the Oddschecker betting show. Please do subscribe to the Oddschecker YouTube channel and the podcast on any podcast platform as well. You can find plenty more preview content with Andy and other guests on the Oddschecker betting show. Racing Weekly to return shortly as well, which is very exciting indeed. Do download the Oddschecker app as ever for the best prices and plenty other bits and bobs, as well as Andy's tips straight to the app every morning of racing. Stick those horses in your tracker. Hopefully we'll be celebrating some big wins at Royal Ascot and beyond with them as well. But as always the case, please ensure that you're gambling responsibly.